trust me, I get it. You're feeling the pressure to keep your faith separate from your work, worried that pursuing your God-given dreams might be seen as selfish or misguided. Here's what I've discovered. Our faith isn't a liability in our leadership. As a matter of fact, it's the source of our strength and wisdom. The real challenge is navigating how to boldly pursue our purpose while staying anchored in our faith. And that's exactly what the Beacon Show is all about. Each week, we bring you biblical wisdom and practical strategies from true beacons, Christian leaders who are illuminating the world. And it's also that you can let your light shine brighter and brighter. I'm Tamara Jackson, and this is The Beacon Show. In a world where success is often measured by personal gain, my friend Chike Aguh stands as a testament to the transformative power of purpose-driven leadership. As the first person in his family born on American soil, Chike's journey from a small New Jersey town to the corridors of the White House reflects more than a personal triumph. It's a living embodiment of the American dream. But for Chike, the dream isn't about personal accomplishment. It's about leveraging every opportunity, every connection, and every hard-won lesson to create a more equitable future for all. From teaching in Brooklyn's toughest classrooms to advising the President of the United States, Chike has consistently asked one question: how can we leverage innovation to uplift those who have historically been left behind? Today, we sit down with a man whose career defies easy categorization: a Fulbright scholar, an educator, a business leader, and a presidential appointee. Chike brings a unique perspective on the intersection of technology, policy, and social impact. His mission is to ensure that the engines of progress, from AI to quantum computing, don't just benefit the few, but become tools of empowerment for all. So join us as we explore the mind of a modern-day polymath who's comfortable discussing comic book heroes and debating economic policy. We'll dive into the lessons learned from navigating a global pandemic from inside the government, the urgent need for diversity in tech development, and why the next great American innovation might come from an unexpected zip code. So get ready to be inspired, but also challenged as we unpack a vision for the future that's as bold as it is inclusive. This is Chike Aguh's story, a testament to what's possible when we dare to dream beyond our circumstances and commit to lifting others as we climb. Enjoy. Well, Chike, welcome to the Beacon Show, where wisdom meets faith and success finds its voice. This is going to be a powerful conversation. I can already tell it just looking at the breadth of your experience that you bring from a leadership standpoint and some of the passions that God has given you. I'm excited to have you here. Thank you for making time for this conversation today.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for just creating this space where we can talk about impact and faith and all this in one place in a way that's positive and unifying. So just thank you for what you do.
Amen. Thank you. Well, Chike, I would love to give our listening audience and viewing audience a glimpse of who you are as a person before we get into the work that you are able to do. So I'd love to start at the beginning. Talk to us about your life growing up. What kind of person was Chike when he was growing up? And what were some of the visions that he had for the future?
Um, it's a big question. The way I like, there's a phrase that President Clinton uses a lot that I like to use, which is, we are all prisoners of biography, in that we are all who we are based on what has come before, either in opposition to or in accordance with. And that's very much me. And I will start from before I was born, because that very much dictates the kind of kid that I was. So as you said, as you know, I am the first person in the entire history of my family born in America. My family is from a far and out of the way village in Nigeria that most Nigerians themselves will never go to and never see. My wife, who also is of Nigerian heritage, when we first started dating, her mom asked about me and said, "Oh, where's his family from?" And she told them, and her mom was like, "Oh, I've heard of that place. No one goes there." So none of my grandparents went past middle school. My parents were born on streets that were unpaved then; they're unpaved now. They had Peace Corps volunteers in their classrooms. My grandparents on my father's side were actually the first people married in a church in our village. Back, God, must have been probably the late 1920s, um, and so or early 1930s. Uh, and what changed life for them, and by extension for me, was they got golden tickets to come to the United States and study at American public universities down in Texas and in the state of New Jersey. And I sit here before you as someone who's gotten to serve an American president. Um, so when I was a kid, I didn't quite understand that, and what really crystallized that for me was when I was 6, 1989, and we went to Nigeria for the first time. This was me. I was 6. My sister, who had just been born, she was probably one and a quarter. And just to give you a sense, 1989, Nigeria's going through a lot. We were in Lagos. Lagos is it was the capital city, but now think of it as Nigeria's New York, a big, bustling business center. And it was Christmas time. So in Nigeria, what happens is during Christmas time at that time, most people are not from places like Lagos or big cities. They're from a village somewhere. And so everyone packs up and they go back to their home village to spend the holidays with their family. That is general tradition. So we got in our cars, a bunch of random cars, and we drove 12 hours to this village where my family's from. And on the way, I'll never forget it. If you've ever been to places like in Nigeria or even in Jamaica, and if you're driving out of a city, you'll stop your car and people will run up to your car and try and sell you stuff: candy, gum, batteries, Coke, whatever. And I remember looking out the window, and this happened, and I looked out the window, and there was a boy with a bunch of stuff to sell, and he probably was 6. And when I looked at him, he looked a lot like me. And it was probably the one bit of wisdom I had as a 6-year-old. And I don't know if it was an epiphany. I don't know if it was a God. I don't know what it was, but I was like, oh, that boy could be me, and that boy, and I could be him. And as a 6-year-old, I couldn't quite understand, why am I here sitting in this very comfortable car going to this village, and I'm going to fly back home to the East Coast in about 2 or 3 weeks, and this boy is going to live a life that may not be too different from what he's living now. And the only answer that I have now, and the only answer I had then, was there's a reason God put me here. And it's not because I was smarter. It's not because I was more deserving. It's not because I am more worthy. It is because my hope is there's something that I'm being given in this amazing life that I get to live here in the United States, different from everyone in my family who's ever lived, that I'm supposed to do something with. And I would say that has stuck with me my entire life. And I would say as a kid that always kind of stuck with me, that um, I'm here in a place that many people would be privileged to be in, and I didn't get here by myself. A lot conspired to bring me to this place. And so, and my parents and everyone in my life kind of said, don't waste that, And so, I think on top of that, I was a parochial school kid my entire life. I took theology every day from first grade to 12th grade. So I went to a lot of churches.
Wow, I think you got me beat. I thought I was in church all the time, but
I was in
you have me
church a
beat,
lot.
TK.
I was in church a lot. We were in service at school like once a week, and if it was like holy time, we were there like 2-3 times a week. We had to do Stations of the Cross. We had the one thing I took from all that instruction, and I read a lot of Bible verses, did a lot of theology, was I go back to that golden rule. In the end, treat people as you would like to be treated. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength. Um, and what I took from all those things that I read was, in some ways, the most pure living of your faith is through service. In that you go above and beyond. If you look at the example of Christ, that is what his life was. It was service. You see very little of Christ like having fun or like just or chilling out. He was out serving. I'm sure when he would have loved to be resting. The only other thing I said, and I'm sure we'll come to it, is if you look at that example of Christ, if you think of all the things that Christ had to do, he could have done it by himself. He was God and he was man, but he did not. He had his 12 apostles, and if you look in most of these stories, he has crowds with him. He has friends, people who know him, and so even my instinct is that is an example he set for us, and that the things that are worth doing can't be done by yourself. They should not be done by yourself. Even the fact that the way he just told Peter, upon this rock I will build my church. He meant for this to be done in community. And so when I think about service and how I've tried to do it, I think I also realized pretty young, hey, I can't do it by myself. Um, I think things that are far more tactical or lowbrow. I was not a cool kid in any way, shape, or form. I had very few friends.
No,
I
you're
spent,
not. You weren't the
no,
cool kid.
no, 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 no. I spent lots of time with my family. I read a lot. That was something that was very important to my parents. I had those parents that when I was off, I had to do book reports. Those were my parents. Um, and still to this day, if you look behind me, I'm surrounded by books. My kids love books as a result. Um, I think that's one. I think two, I was a very big fan of stories, stories of good and evil, heroes struggling. So King Arthur, Lord of the Rings. I love comic books for this reason. In that there are things to be done, people who should be stood up for. Um, and if you've been given, whether it's power or opportunity, you should leverage it on behalf of others. So that's a thing from when I was a kid that I really really loved. I was not good at sports. I was like I had none of those things that generally are socially useful. Um, but I was big into reading, and it was how I tried to kind of expand my mind. And I think my folks really pushed. They pushed me to read things. I read the Three Musketeers, Alexander Dumas when I was 8. I didn't quite understand. I had to read it a couple of times to get it, or Gulliver's Travels from Adam Swift, or things like that. And that was I think really powerful and really important for me personally uh, because one is it's a habit that I picked up, and again, when I think about my own kids, I have two now. I try and impart that, but number two, talking to particularly like my mom when she was living where she was, that was her window to the world. So that was me. That was me as a kid, and if my wife was here, I think she would tell you that most of that has persisted into me as an adult and a husband and a father.
Hmm. I heard you mention that you love comic books. Now, do you also love the movies that come
I've
from
seen
the
every movie. I've seen
You've
every
seen
movie.
every so who is now this is gonna be interesting.
Whoa,
Who is your
boy!
favorite
Don't do
character?
this.
Who is your favorite character?
Oh no, don't do this. This is not. This is like asking someone to choose between their kids. Um,
Oh, I know it's tough.
so, so there are heroes who let me say that there are heroes who speak to me in particularly powerful ways. Um, Obviously, Black Panther. Obviously, seeing a vision of a black society that looks like that with a leader leveraging, obviously, in some ways, mystical power or non-rational power on top of unbelievable technology. That's phenomenal. I will say when Chadwick Boseman passed, that was actually very sad for me because I so loved his portrayal of the character, which I thought was so true. Um, Captain America, obviously, I think for me, and particularly Captain America as portrayed by Chris Evans, because again, if you think back to the beginning of Captain America is not this big strong guy. He's just a guy with a big heart, and he's chosen for this power because of his heart. And if you look at the entire story, the part that I always remember is from the last Avengers movie, where all the other heroes are knocked down. It's just him, and it looks like it's the end, and he just picks up his shield, he straps it on, and he says, "Whatever's going to happen is going to happen, but I'm not giving up." And that's the thing that I find really powerful. And then lastly, Iron Man, particularly as portrayed by Robert Downey Jr. One, because he's an amazing actor, he's hilarious, but in the end, he's always the one who makes the sacrifice. Even though by his character you wouldn't think, because he's always a joker, he always seems selfish. But if you look at all the movies, he's the one who always makes the sacksacrifice, and in the end, it's his life for everyone else. And I think, in some ways, echoing the faith, in the end, when we talk about service, that is that ultimate sacrifice, to kind of, give it all, give it all up. I will also say, I'm also a big DC fan.
Ah,
So
so you are.
Superman,
Okay.
Batman. I wasn't cool, so that's what I did, and I would have hung out with my friends because I didn't really
Yeah.
have any as a kid. But it's those same things, which is you have people who have been given extraordinary power. Superman as an example, and they could do a lot of different things with that power. Most people would do selfish things. They choose to put themselves in the line on behalf of others every single day. And again, we're not superheroes. We can't fly. We can't lift buildings. We can't shoot lasers from our eyes. But a lot of us have opportunities that many of the people pray for. And the question is, what are you going to do with them? With that, and the answer, hopefully, is you've made the world a little better after you go back home. And so so that's always what's kind of spoken to me about that, because if you were to really write comic books like realistically, you see a lot of people like, hey, I can run really fast. I am going to play football. I'm going to be a wide receiver and make tons of money. Or I have the power to control people's minds. Oh shoot, I'm gonna do a lot of things with that. But these characters choose to do different things on behalf of others, and that's kind of what's always spoken to me there. No, you asked me no one's ever asked me that question. That's a very difficult one.
I couldn't resist. I couldn't resist. I was like, man, let's see where he's at. And I wasn't sure if you were going to be, because some people are diehard DC and they no Marvel. And some people, Marvel. No. So I was curious, like, are you one camp or the other? But you just love the stories.
I love the stories. And I'm someone who grew also broad science myself. Huge Star Wars fan, huge Star Trek fan.
Okay.
We could do a whole podcast just on me and those. Lord of the Rings. I read all those books when I was a kid. When the movies came out, I've seen every movie there is to see. I'm watching the show now on Amazon. But it comes back to the same, which is you have people who have opportunities, have huge quests put in front of them, some unlikely, some with great power, and they choose, you know what, I'm going to do the hard thing, and this on behalf of others, even at great personal cost. And it's in some ways they put forward examples that you hope to live up to.
Yeah. I love the way you put that, because it's easy to get caught up in the action, and especially today, the way technology has evolved. When you see a movie, you're like, whoa, look at that. But there is this deeper meaning, even though we're being entertained, there's this deeper meaning behind each of these heroes. And you're right, each one of us in our own way, God has given us an opportunity to impact people, to be able to choose service over ourselves. And I'm blessed that you are spending time with us today, because there are some experiences that you have that are going to help us to be able to, as beacons, be able to step into, I believe, a higher level of service because of the things that you've been exposed to. You mentioned that you've been able to serve an American president. I can't imagine what that was like. But before we get there, walk us through some of the different roles that you have served in, going from that little boy that's seeing a boy that looks a lot like him and realizing, hey, that could have been me. But what was the path for you between that moment to serving a U.S. president? What were some of the roles?
Yeah. I'll go back even a little further. I think when I was growing up, and again, I wanted for nothing. If you look at the life that I got to live as a kid versus the life that my parents lived, they could not be more different. And like many people who grow up that way, you kind of want to go out in the wider world. I grew up in a little suburban town, great school, super safe, and you're like, oh my God, this place is so boring. I want to go out and I want to see
shake it up, right?
Yeah. So I went to Tufts University, right outside of Boston, and I started college September 7th, 2001. And so I remember exactly where I was when 9/11 happened. I was in biology class when it happened, and for those who remember that day, those planes took off from Logan Airport, which is the local Boston airport. And I remember that day. Obviously, not a great day for the country or for the world. And that was when I think the world, there's a big world out here with good and bad, and it is smaller than this little microcosm that I've lived in for my life. And I think all of that I brought with me. I said, this. I would have described myself as most 17-year-olds were. I don't know quite what I'm here to do. And I had a sense after that it was something in the public realm. After that happened, there's a lot to do out here in the world. And so I was going to be a doctor. Number one, I was not good at any of that. I was not good at any of that. My grades showed it.
So you had a little help deciding?
I think that was the Lord intervening. That's what
Let me help him out.
that's what I told my parents when they saw the grades. They weren't quite that didn't quite suffice. But I remember, and I remember I switched my major to political science. I said there are things I want to learn, and so did that. I was in student government. This is the kid who wasn't cool. I also, one thing I'll say, which I didn't say before, is one thing that shaped my childhood, even to this very day, is like President Biden, I grew up with a stutter, a really bad stutter, a really intense speech impediment, actually hereditary. My mom had one, my grandpa had one. Um, and so fast forwarding to college, me standing up on a stage, running for office, becoming student body president of my university, that was not what that's again why I say like I can only explain that through like God because if you think about and then go back to the Bible, I think about Moses, and I'm not Moses in any way, shape, or form, but Moses also had a stutter. It's always why I identified with Moses, and that God at times will choose unlikely people to do things. And so that was me in college, and so when I was leaving college, I thought I was going to go to law school. That's what I thought. I was going to go to law school. One is I actually really liked the law. I liked to argue. I liked all that. But then I took the test, and
The
I took
LSAT, huh?
and I think God spoke to me again, and I said, okay, I'm
Yes.
going to need to do some other things. Maybe try this again. And so when I graduated college, I was accepted into a program called the New York City Urban Fellows Program. It's a program that's been around since the 1960s, and it's a program to take, frankly, what they called young, bright people and bring them into New York City government to work. And the goal was hopefully some of these people would stay, become leaders in city government one day. Been around since the Lindsay administration in the late 60s. I was accepted. It was a tremendous honor. I worked in the New York City Department of Education. And for me, that was actually a very powerful placement. Obviously, I would not be here without education specifically. The largest public school system in the country by far, still to this very day, even bigger than when I was there. 1.2 million students. One stat I always like to use is that the only institution every day that serves more meals than the New York City public schools is the U.S. Army. So just the scale, 95 languages spoken in the New York City public schools. And for a year, I got to go around and work on things like guidance counseling, trying to come up with different types of schools for kids who were in the juvenile justice system, kids who got pregnant, kids who were homeless, kids who were in foster care. And you've kind of got to see what the American dream could be. I got to see, young moms who didn't think they could get a high school diploma who were able to because of programs that we created. And you would also see schools that were failures, that failed kids every day. And so did that, and then went into the Teach for America program, which is a program to basically take young people and have them teach in the most underserved neighborhoods in the country. So I taught in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, not too far from where Jackie Robinson lived when he played for the Dodgers. I taught at that time was in the only all boys public elementary school in the country. So I taught 46 black boys over 2 years in second grade. Probably the hardest and best work of my life, along with my work for President Biden. And again, every student left me and my co-teacher on grade level. Could not be prouder of that, particularly in a neighborhood that's one of the poorest in New York City. At the same time, when that 2 years was over, I said, all right, I'm going to see 23 kids every year if I keep doing this. But I know by the numbers, there are millions of kids, particularly these young black men, who I'm never going to see if that's just what I do. And so one thing that also came through me is like I have this obsession with scale. How do we not just take care of these people, but also impact everyone? So went on a Fulbright grant to Southeast Asia. I went to Thailand, also Laos, Cambodia, taught, did research. I left the country the second week of September in 2008. So it was right after Lehman collapsed. I remember this, and then went abroad. And in some ways, I spent the next from 08 to 09 abroad. I watched the Great Recession from abroad. I watched Barack Obama elected abroad. I watched all of those things. And it was an interesting way to see one's own country. And also spending time in Southeast Asia. And I wanted to go to Asia because as we know today, this next century will be determined by what happens in Asia and also how we in America interact with that. So on. So I wanted to go and see it firsthand. So did that, was amazing. Came back, went to graduate school for about 4 years, went to the Wharton School to get my MBA, and then went to Harvard University in Cambridge to get my Master of Public Administration, my Master in Education. Because I had this theory of the case that the problems I wanted to work on, um, particularly this problem for me of kind of how do you use skills to create economic opportunity. No one does that by themselves. To go to this point that we talked about before, and one thing that I noticed when I was even that early part of my career was different people in different places, whether they be in the education system itself, business, people in government, they didn't work well together. They didn't collaborate well together, and what I found was, yes, there was animosity and times personal stuff, but at the end, they didn't speak each other's language and understand each other's reality. And my theory was that you needed more people who did to have those type of collaborations that are going to make the big difference. So why I did this odd education that I did was that reason. So came out, and when I came out, this was God 2013. I went to a company. I said I'd never worked in the private sector, and I wanted to. So I came to Maryland, which is our home now. Got married to a wonderful woman who's tenure faculty at Hopkins. My wife Crystal, and started at a higher education company. Helped launch some of their first student facing tools. They now serve half of American higher education, technology, research, consulting. Um, and then from there went to lead a nonprofit. Very different. I went from a 2,000 person company where I was a kind of a middle executive to being the number two and then the CEO of a nonprofit. It was 20 people focused on broadband access, particularly for families who had children. And one thing that we were arguing back then in 2015 was that the internet is the pathway to a lot of other stuff in society: education, healthcare, work. And when we would say that, people kind of got it. But if you fast forward now 5 years to the pandemic, then everyone understood it. Everyone, everyone understood. But back then, that was still the internet was still seen as a luxury, and we were still arguing with people about, well, if you give poor people the internet, they're just going to go on Netflix and play on their phones and all this. And I would say, but that's what you do. But and you're fine, but it also does all this other stuff. And so we were, probably the proudest point in my time being CEO of that organization was what was something we called the Connect Home Initiative, which was basically working with the Obama administration. We actually had President Obama at our kickoff event for this initiative, working to connect people who live in public housing to the internet. And just to give you a sense, people in public housing are the poorest people in America. Average of the poverty line in America for a family of four is $27,400, I believe. The average family in public housing makes $14,000 a year, barely $1,000 a month. And so if we can help these folks, we've done a lot for the people who are on the wrong side of so many things in our society. And so now that is a 100-city initiative, helps connect over 100,000 people to the internet who didn't have it. And now I can only imagine the difference that made in their lives during the pandemic, when kids are going to school at home, when, God forbid, if you're sick, you're doing a telehealth visit. If you work yourself, you're doing it from home if you can. And so really, really proud of that. From there, went back to the private sector. And partially I did it kind of on faith. I wanted to work. I had been a CEO for 3 years, and I said, proud of what I did, in many ways, proud of how I led, but also you're always learning. So I said, I want to work for a great leader, and I found one. General Stanley McChrystal, who is a legendary, and it's hard to encapsulate the legend of who he is, but Joint Special Operations Commander in Iraq, led our forces in Afghanistan, retired four-star general. He wrote a book on leadership called Team of Teams. And the thing that I took from that book and why I wanted to work for him was he talked about lead as a gardener. And what he meant by this metaphor is this: most leaders think my job is to come in and I tell everyone what to do. Do what I say. And he said, that's not your job. Your job is, yes, hire the right people, give them a charge, give them some broad rules in a box. But your job is to help them do the job. Your job is to be like a gardener. Like in a garden, you have flowers that are trying to grow, and your job is to pull up the weeds, pull out the rocks so that the flowers can grow. That's your job. It's a very different type of leadership. And so when I worked for him, I was our director of strategy, and we worked mainly with Fortune 1,000, 2,000 companies, usually at the highest level, to help them lead like that. How do you help your entire team be on the same page, know what the mission is? How do you help them share information with each other so they don't have to come to you for everything? How do you help them trust each other? Because a lot of times people don't do that sharing because they don't trust each other. How do you make sure that people feel the empowerment to take decisions into their own hands? Not every decision, but how do you make sure that the decision making is pushed to the lowest appropriate level so that, like we see in so many organizations, the instinct when someone is given a question is to kick it upstairs. As a leader, that takes up so much of your time. How many times have those of us who've led said, wait, why am I making this decision? And the answer is you need to actually empower those people who are quote unquote below you to do that. And that's that leadership as guarding it. I was so um, glad to work for him. I learned so much, yes, by what he told me, but just by how he was. And again, I had never been in the military. But it was a very different experience. That organization at that time was 50% ex-military. And when I say ex-military, I'm talking about Navy SEALs. We had number SEAL Team 6 members. I'm talking about Delta Force. I'm talking about Marine First Recon. These are people who have done the most dangerous of dangerous things on behalf of our country. And just that culture, I appreciate. I always respected it, but seeing it kind of firsthand, as close as I could, without actually doing it myself, was so instructive, and I was so blessed to work there. And I found, and the only reason I ended up there was I had a friend who worked there who saw I might need a job, and she said, "Come on down and see." And she spoke up for me. That was again, my pastor says this a lot. God rarely shouts; He whispers. And that was a whisper that put me in where I wanted to be at that time. And so was there pretty much into the pandemic. I remember when the pandemic started, we went remote in 4 days, still serving clients, not just public client, not just clients like companies, but also clients like the city of Boston, the mayor of Boston, who Marty Walsh at that time, who ended up being my secretary about 6 months later. And so I always say I'd probably still be at the McChrystal Group, except I got a call if I wanted to put my name in for a job, being the job I ended up holding, which is the Chief Innovation Officer role at the Department of Labor. Um, and I was like, no one knows me. Sure, you called me, but what's I'm Joe Biden doesn't know me from Adam. And I remember, I think I did my first, and just to give you a sense, I mean, my father-in-law at that time, he actually had been suffering from a cancer diagnosis. He actually passed right, right at the end of 2020, right after the Thanksgiving. Obviously, we have our young son. At that time, he was probably 2 or 3 years old at that time. No, he was 3. Obviously, we're dealing with the world, and this opportunity came. And I said, okay, I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't think it was going to go anywhere, to be honest. Um, oh, because look, I mean, one thing I always say is just to give you a sense, there are 4,200 roles in the federal government that are appointed by the president. 4,200. Those are the top 4,200 people in the federal government. There are at any given time in America 1 million people who would love to be in one of those roles, and most of them are very qualified. So actually saying pick the best person is actually not the answer because they're all qualified. Now it's a mix of who do I know, who has a particular expertise that I need at a given time, and I'm like, who am I? And so I think I interviewed first for that role first week in December, and I got the call. And this now goes into what I'm sure we'll talk about in terms of the pandemic and my time in government. I received a call to take this job on January 7th, 2021, the day after the insurrection. And just to give you a sense, for those of you who don't know Washington, D.C., the Department of Labor sits a block behind the Capitol. So literally, my colleagues or my future colleagues sat there that day, locked down by security, and they went to the roof and they watched what happened that day. And so I remember afterward, my wife, she said, "Are you sure you want to go work there?" Um, but I say, that's the time you want to serve. I believe, now we have 2 kids. Yeah, and I think actually about a month after that, we found out we were having a girl. And so I said, someday my kids are going to ask me about this time. If you think about that time, let's go back. The pandemic. We had just rolled out vaccines the month before. An insurrection. Literally, I never thought I would ever see people by force try to take the government. And then economic calamity. And we have to go back to that time just to give you a sense. The worst month of job loss before the pandemic ever was, I think, December of '08. 900,000 jobs lost in a single month. Fast forward to May of 2020, 20 million American jobs evaporated in a single month. As hard as that time was for people personally, for us as a country, for us as a world, that's the time you should want to serve. One, because that's when great things happen, because that's the time when people are like, you know what, all that stuff we said we weren't going to do before, let's do it now. Let's do it now. That's when human beings change, when things are rough. But then also, that's in times of need is when you should want to be needed. That's when you should want to step forward. And one day my kids gonna ask me, Dad, what did you do? And I want to have an answer that I'm proud of. That I'm proud of, and I'm proud. I'm very, very proud of what I did there. Anyone who's worked in administration will tell you it's hard. It's not perfect. There's tons of stuff you wish you did. There's tons of stuff you wish you did differently. That's just the nature of leadership at any level, particularly at that level. But I go back and I look at that with great pride personally, as well as what I think we did for the country. And I can dive down a bunch of data rabbit holes to say why I'm proud of it. But in the end, um, to step forward and serve, hopefully in a spirit of service and decency, and trying to do your best on behalf of your fellow American, I would do it again 10 times over, as hard as it was.
Wow. I love what you said. You know, one day your kids are going to ask you about this time, and you wanted to have an answer that you are proud of. Um, I hear this theme in everything that you're sharing, Chike, is that of course we all need to earn a living. You have a family that you have to take care of, you know, all of these things, but it's not just that for you. There's something that you are looking for, it seems, in each leadership role, in each assignment that you have taken on, where you have an opportunity to impact people. And I love this too, because I'm a huge fan. How do I impact people at scale? So it sounds like there's this lens that you're evaluating these opportunities through. And when either you have this inner confirmation, or I don't know if it's a checklist, what it looks like for you, but when all the stars align, you're like, okay, this might look dangerous in some ways. This might take me way outside of my box, but I want to do this because it's about a bigger mission, or bigger calling, a bigger story that you're being called into.
It's interesting. I'll say two things there, and they're not things you asked, but I think they're important. I think there's one, and it's also interesting doing this when it's not just you. You are in the sense of a family. So my wife Crystal, who I think our wedding picture is sitting over there. Um, she's the opposite of me. If you were to ask her about her career over the last 12 years, it's I am a researcher at a position at Johns Hopkins University. She has been there since 2012. Same place that like my like and people look at the two of us and it's always very different in the sense of there's some days I joke with her where I say, oh, I bet you wish you like married a dentist who like had the same job, he got 25, your life would be a lot easier. And she's like, that's true some days. But I think making sure that when you're doing that, you think about, it's not just you. So, that is a reality of service. So I think that's one. I think secondly, something that my pastor talks about a lot. He had a great sermon series on this. He talks about each of us have two things we got to do for God. There is our walk with God, that is keeping His commandments, trying to figure out how do I stay close to God. Then there's your work for God. Those are two different things. Ideally, if you have a good walk with God, it's easier for you to do the work for God. So, for example, if all you did was follow the commandments, live His golden rule, you haven't actually done everything that He meant for you to do. There's a thing that each of us is meant to do above and beyond following His edicts and rules, because there's something that we're meant to do in the world. And so when I think about what is the work for God that I am supposed to do, and for everyone it's different, I try and look at it with that lens, and also to the point of a checklist, how do I make sure that these three particular human beings that I am responsible for, being my wife, Crystal, my son Kalechi, my daughter Chizara, that they also get what they're supposed to have according to His will and His plan, what I want for them. That's kind of the Venn diagram I'm always trying to hit. It's never easy. It's never perfect. It never will be for anyone who's watching this. But I think that is how I try and look at it. And definitely at my best, before I make a big decision, you try and kind of sit and talk to the maker and make sure that you're right. But also, one thing I'll tell people is as well, again, God rarely shouts, He whispers. And at times He doesn't speak in His voice, He speaks through the voices of others. And so also having those people in your life, um, or at times people who aren't in your life a lot, but who would come in at weird times and will say a thing. And there have been times I've gotten advice where, hey, don't do that. Or no, think about this. From people who I wouldn't have expected. And, if I look back on it, I say that may have been um, the words of someone higher through, through you. And again, I think being able to to listen to that. And I think at times, whatever achievements I've been able to have are not due to me. It's because on my best days, I listen. On my best days, and the times I don't have my best days, as my wife will tell you. Um, and
Not every day is the best day.
not every day is the best. She's shocking, but listening, again, God's voice is not in the tornado, it's not in the volcano, it's not in the hurricane. At times, it's just in that small breeze. And I've tried to keep myself open to that, particularly at these kind of juncture points in my time of service, and also knowing, we went through this quickly. You are going to have screw ups. You are going to fall. You are going to have times where you don't look that smart. And some of that was because you actually just screwed up. Some of that was to teach you something. Sometimes those screw ups actually kept you out of a thing you weren't supposed to be in. That thing you thought you wanted to achieve actually wasn't for you. But learning from that, because one thing that I saw. So if you go back to my time when I was teaching, when you do Teach for America, it's a 2-year commitment. Many go on longer. Some just do the 2-year commitment. But there are people who don't make it all the way through. And the one thing that I always noticed, there's some people who just had life circumstances. Oh my God, a parent passed away. There were those who had life happen, and I will know. But there were some people who I noticed who couldn't quite make it through and I noticed there were people who had generally been successful, who hadn't been knocked down in life. And one thing about teaching, particularly if you're teaching somewhere that doesn't have a lot of resources, you're going to get knocked down a lot. If you want to really be humbled, you want to really whatever, go teach some kids. Because every day you are trying to make the case that they should listen to you, that you have something to offer them. We would love to say, oh, you should just listen to me because I'm your teacher, but that's not how it works. That's not, because, to be honest, school historically had failed them. That school may have failed their parents, their grandparents. So historically, school has not always been that place that's made that value prop. So, but what I noticed was people who had a hard time making it through sometimes, they had not failed before. And so when that failure came, it's going to hit you in the mouth. Sometimes they didn't know how to handle that. And so in some ways, doing hard things early so that you learn, okay, I can survive this. And then learning how to reflect, okay, all right, that and that were not in my control, but I could have done these 2 things differently. And the next time I'm in a situation like this, I'm going to do, now being 40, I've learned about failure enough but I'm glad I had some experience when I was 23, because if you've never failed, and what's going to happen is when you get to a point of like really scaled, impactful leadership, and if that's the first time you failed, you will fail at something. You will, and that's when you have to learn to develop those skills. That's going to be a problem, not just for you, but for the people that you're trying to help, for the people that you're trying to serve, whether that's in your business, whether that's in a public role, whether that's even just in your own family. So I'm grateful for that early on. It served me well in government because that was hard. That was the beginning of any administration is hard because you're trying to set up a government in record time. But doing that, number one, sitting in this chair for 20 hours a day, because I was sworn in, and you can find the video. I was sworn in my home office because we couldn't go in like 1,000 other of my colleagues. We sat here, and we had people who were working, they were in California. They would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning for 9 a.m. meetings here on the East Coast. We had, and then you were working till 11 on the East Coast, and then you did it all. I mean, people did it all again. I mean, people had their own kids that they were trying to help through. I worked with many colleagues who lost people literally during the process, while you're again trying to serve the president, serve the country. And so when I think about the best people, if you really would ask them, they would tell you, yeah, they went through a lot. If you look here, you can't see it. I have an RFK for president poster, an original one from '68. He's a deep hero of mine. When I was at the Department of Labor, his oldest daughter, Kathleen Kennedy Townsend, was a colleague of mine. She worked down the hall, and I got to have lunch with her once, and she talked about this. She had been lieutenant governor of Maryland. She had lost the race for Congress once, did a ton of other stuff in life, and working at the Department of Labor with me, working on retirement issues, and all of that experience, good and bad, not just of her, but of her family, uh, made her able to do all that. So that's just one thing I would take from people. People try to only learn from their successes. No, learn from the failures, learn from the falls.
How do you this is also going to be a tough question, but I'm curious how you process the pandemic. We are now at the time of this recording in 2024, and it doesn't, in some ways to me, it seems like it was just yesterday, and in other ways, it seems like it was an eternity ago. Um, how do you process the time that was the height of the pandemic, 2020, 2021? Do you put it in a success bucket in terms of our overall response and how we navigated that? Was it a failure? Was it a mix of both? Depending on who I talk to, everyone has a different perspective on that time. I'm curious because of the roles that you sat in. How do you process it?
Um, Let me process it two ways. One, personally, which I think is important. For our family, it brought us closer together, which I would consider, a lot of hard things happened to our family during that time, as many families. We lost people. Um, Life was hard. We're trying to figure out how to, we had a 2, 3-year-old boy at that time, trying to figure out how to make sure that he gets what he needs, so on and so forth. Not being able to be close to people that we wanted to, but I would say it brought us closer together. Um, as a country and as a world, there are many ways to answer this question. I would say if you look at America and you look at our economic growth over these last 4 years, or actually, so before I even go into that, let me be very clear. We will not understand the full impact of this for a half century.
For sure. 100%.
This will be a time we're going to write books and make movies about this time because the reverberations are still, it's like a big rock that got thrown in the pool and the ripples will go out for a long time. So in some ways, this is a hard question to answer. But I would say if you look at America and our economic progress, and let's leave inflation aside because everyone's dealing with inflation, every country, every advanced economy. No economy in the G20 is doing as well as America. None. Like, just part of that is the resilience of the American economy. Some of that is direct policy choices that were made. So, for example, this is why having President Biden in that chair was very helpful, because President Biden was the vice president during the Great Recession. And if you were to ask President Biden some things that he wishes we had all done differently during that time, he's like, I wish we had given the American people even more support. One thing is, even though we came out of the Great Recession decent, a lot of people suffered longer than they needed to. We didn't get back to kind of where we wanted to be for almost more than a half decade. So one of the things that we did was we basically paid every business in America to not fire people. Do not fire people. Because one thing we learned, if you let people go, don't just think you can bring them back. That's not, because we saw that. People tried to, and it didn't quite work out that way. We had people who were long-term unemployed for years after that. Because every second you're out of the labor market, it hurts you. Because, you've had, hey, so why were you not employed for the last 2 years? Well, there was a great recession, didn't you? But people still, and particularly for women, for people of color, for immigrants, that's doubly held against them in the labor market. So we've said, do whatever you can to keep people on. And we did the PPP program, which many businesses that I'm sure that did, and hopefully taking advantage of to keep people on. We saw that. That made a huge difference because people weren't left out and then brought back. Hey, I was in my job. I had a job. The child tax credit. We cut child poverty in this country by almost 40% due to the child tax credit. American Rescue Plan, which basically helped local government states stay afloat. And I won't do a whole Biden administration commercial, but there were some policy choices that were made, learned from the Great Recession, that are the reason why we are economically better off than a bunch of our kind of comparison countries. Now, I think the very large missed opportunity, the very large, how will I say, calamity that was avoidable was, I think, 2020. I think I have strong disagreements with how that administration handled that. Strong. And I think it led to the fact that we lost a million Americans. I'll be very candid about that. Um, and I think and I think the biggest macro mistake was this was a thing that shouldn't have been in any way political or partisan. To me, this was the equivalent of like aliens are landing and they say they want to take over the earth. Like in all the movies that I used to see when I was a kid, and we put aside everything, we come together and we say, hey, you know what? We got to fight these aliens. This was the same thing here, and I think the biggest calamity of that administration response in the year 2020 was it was treated as more of a political thing. One, two, I don't think we followed the science, and three, it was a time when people wanted leadership, and I think the response was, hey, everybody figure it out, do what you want, governors, mayors, everybody do what you want. Whereas I think if we had an administration, because people were scared, and think back to like in the beginning when we didn't know what this was, we didn't know how it was spread, we didn't know what like if someone had stepped forward and said, "Hey, we're going to do this," and by the way, think about the people who really shined during that time. Certain governors, certain mayors who just took control and said, "Hey, here's what we're going to do. It might change. This is tough, but we are going to do it. And when things change, I'm going to look you in the eye and I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you why. When we screw up, we're going to look you in the eye, tell you why, and this is what we're going to do differently." And I think that's a lesson of leadership overall. When you're in a time of crisis, you don't, as a leader, step back, you step forward. You communicate, you respond. Look, I'm from the state of Maryland. The Key Bridge collapsed March of this year. Governor Moore, I've known him for a long time. If you look at that response to that horrible crisis, not just the people who died, not just the people in the Port of Baltimore whose jobs were at stake, not just all the companies who, the Port of Baltimore is the number one site of car imports in the United States. It is the number one site of energy export from the United States. He literally did a press conference every day for 3 months to tell what was happening, to tell what's happening with clearing the channel, with recovering the people who passed, with supporting the people whose jobs were at stake. That's what people need during leadership. And it's not that the leader does everything. What they do is they're empowering other people to do what needs to be done, but they're telling the people, here's what's happening. Someone has at least an idea or a plan, and here's what we need from you. And I don't think we got that in 2020. And I think, if I'm candid, and I don't mean to sound harsh, there are people who would be here if that had happened. And what I think about when I came into government, the first thing we had to think about was, okay, now we got to kind of clean up the last 9 months. And that's never a place you want to start in leadership. And by the way, that happens sometimes in leadership. You come in and you're like, I'm dealing with things that I didn't create. I'm inheriting in this, and you can complain, you can badger, you can say it's the last guy's fault. And to be honest, you have to do some of that because you have to be clear about where, because everyone wants to know what happened, who's accountable. But in the end, it's on you. After a while, you just got to handle it. You got to figure it out, and that's how I think about it. So I say, if you look at the macro data, our response was fairly successful. Looking at where the America is compared to our peer countries, that doesn't bring back the million people that we lost. It doesn't bring back the shocks to America. And we see it in our economy, we see it in our politics, we see it in our communities. The fact that wearing a mask became a political statement when it's just a thing that hopefully people do to keep themselves healthy if they so choose in normal times. So that's how I think about it. It's a complicated picture, but I think successful, but with missed opportunities, and there are people that we're going to mourn forever because of this. And my hope is that if something like this happens again, we learn and we do better. That's the thing that would, I won't say make all of it worth it, because I'll never quite say that, but it's the thing that would say there was a broader wisdom to what happened here.
Yeah. I'm actually glad that you went there, because one of the things that I remember processing was, even when things started to normalized to a degree. Is this really it? Like, are we going to see something else that's going to happen? And now here we're sitting in 2024, things feel normal, but I'll be honest, in the back of my mind, I'm like, okay, but if that happened before, it could happen again. So if it does, what are some of the things I want to talk a little bit about emerging technology? How can it help us? Because I think sometimes, people are fans of technology, sometimes they're not. But we have some things that have happened over the last few years that I would hope could help us be in a better place if this were to happen again. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, this will likely not be the last thing we experience like this. We are in an interconnected world, and the thing that we learned is that there's this other side of globalization, which is something that happens in a random part of Asia can be visited to us. We're not going to. We should not pull up our drawbridge. We should not have build a wall around us. Like that's not good for us. It's not good for anyone. But there is this side that we have to mitigate, which is good things as well as bad things can come across borders. Knowing that, I think a couple of things. And I'll come to the technology piece. I think one thing that you saw from the company side is a lot of companies said we've had these far flung supply chains where we build one part of our product in this country, then we build one other part here, so on and so forth. And that was great for efficiency. But when the pandemic happened and we had to shut all that down, that's why I went to the grocery store and there was nothing on the shelves. Or I went to Target and there was nothing on the shelves. And we had those supply shocks, which actually, in many ways, fueled the inflation that we're seeing now. Because inflation is basically when you have the same amount of money, but far less supply. So the price of everything you have goes up. That's just basically what inflation is. And so companies are doing things what you'll call onshoring, meaning I'm going to bring some of that back to America, which is actually good for Americans. Meaning I'm going to make some of that stuff I used to make abroad. I'm going to make it here because God forbid something like this happens again, I at least can have it here. That's one. Or you hear what's called friendshoring, meaning I'm not going to build it in pick a random country on the other side of the world. I'm going to build it in Canada because at least I can take a truck across the border and bring it here, so on and so forth. So have that. So resilience has become as much of a value for a lot of businesses as has that efficiency that they're seeing through globalization, which I think can redound to the economic benefit of Americans. That's one. So when we think about emerging technology and the pandemic, here's where these two things come together. All these trends around emerging technology that we saw before the pandemic, I actually would argue the pandemic didn't change any of that. It just accelerated it dramatically. We had Zoom before. We had GoToMeeting and all this, but then it became a necessity. By the way, just one caveat that I'll give. Only 45% of Americans can do their jobs remotely. If you are a stock person, if you work in healthcare, if you are a nurse, that's so at times I always would say just temper. This is a bit of an elite conversation that we're having. So that's and I remember when the Bureau of Labor Statistics told us that they were like, hey, just so you understand, it's only like less than half American jobs. But these technologies, and let's talk about AI. I spend a lot of my time talking about AI and the workforce. And what I say with AI, and it's true of any emerging technology, is there's promise and peril. There's a lot of promise, and there are things we have to mitigate. On the peril side, it's are these tools biased? Can they have hallucinations, not produce the right stuff? What does privacy look like? What does security look like? Um, if this large language model, which powers this tool, is using my data, do I get paid for that? We've not figured any of this stuff out because the technology usually goes ahead of the rules. That's usually how it works. Um, but there is promise. And when I think about what's some of the promise, and I'm thinking about some of your listeners, if you're running a small business, some of these tools can do things for you that you would have hired someone for. Like, for example, I met a young entrepreneur, 4-person firm. He needed to make a website. He would normally have hired someone on like an Upwork or somewhere like that. He did that with ChatGPT. He's like, I'm never going to do that again. I'm not making some crazy website. I can write this code using the tool. That's one example. Hey, or I am a 10-person bakery and I want an employee handbook. Most people hire someone to write an employee handbook. ChatGPT, write me an employee handbook for a firm that does this. It won't be perfect. That's not, to be fair, even if you got that from someone you hired, it wouldn't be perfect. You would still have to rejigger it, so on and so forth. So there are these. the thing that I say is the conversation we're having right now is about AI replacing machines. You'll have businesses say, I need to do more with less. The more is more value, the less is replace the humans with the AI. I say change that paradigm. How can we do a lot more with a lot more? And when I say a lot more, that a lot more is way more revenue, quantum leaps in revenue and impact. And the second a lot more is this combination of people and machines. That's that AI enablement. That's a term that you'll hear more and more. And that is, I actually think, the game changer for what's possible if firms, governments, organizations are smart and forward thinking about it. And so the thing that I tell firms, particularly small businesses, don't wait. Start now. Get these tools. Most of them are free. It don't cost that much. Learn how you would use them. Start using them, and don't. And then secondly, don't use them everywhere. Don't use them in every single part of your business. Actually, that doesn't totally make sense in every part of your business. Use it. Hey, there are going to be a couple of places. And one thing that someone, a scholar from MIT said is begin to use AI in places where I don't need 99.999% accuracy. Use it in places where like 95% is good enough and the humans can take care of the rest, so on and so forth. And because basically, if you look at the data, to go from 95% accuracy with a large language model or an AI tool, it's like 99.9, the costs actually jump exponentially. It costs, you need, that's the thing that is not clear to the average person, but I remember he showed me that it was like, oh, wow, it's going to cost you like 100x to go from 95 to like 99.9 in terms of the energy cost, the compute you'll have to pay for, the additional amounts of data that you'll need, so on and so forth. So if you 95% will take care of you in certain places, you do that. Learn how to use it, create the value, so on and so forth. And then the hope is those costs will go down over time. But right now we're still in the infancy. The other thing I'll say as someone who just studies like future of work and the labor market is when before the pandemic, when I would have these conversations, we were always talking about the machines will place people who do work that is routinized or do work that requires their physical bodies. Hey, if you carry stuff for a living, the robot's going to replace you. Or if you do stuff that you do over and over again, the robot's going to replace you. What's interesting is on the the human labor side, that's actually not quite happening. What we're finding is actually the AI has a really hard time replicating human motor function. So, for example, if you look at autonomous vehicles, that's going to take longer than we thought because the AI has a hard time when it's driving knowing, is that a person, is that a squirrel, is that a stop sign, is that a tree? The people who actually are probably feeling a little more squeezed right now are people who did historically white collar professions who we thought were safe. For example, if you read and write and summarize for a living, that AI is not that bad at that. It's needed to think. And to be honest, the question is, someone said, my a colleague of my wife's used an AI tool to write an abstract for a paper, and it wrote the abstract, and she's like, yeah, it's not perfect, but this is roughly what I would get from like a first year med student. And so that's something to think about. So the other question is, how do you think about whatever your skill set is? How do you emphasize the things that the AI either one will never be able to do or can't do yet? And one thing that I say is when I think about our macro frame for this, I think many of the things that you learn in an education, in some ways through your faith, are some of that human element that right now and probably forever the AI can't totally replace. When you think about leadership, communication, conflict resolution, those are what I would call human skills. The AI hasn't quite replaced them yet. And if anything, the thing that I say to people is the thing that's going to make you economically indispensable is the ability to merge those things. The technical skills, what I call the just-in-time skills, and what I call the timeless skills, the things that human beings have been doing since time immemorial, the things that Socrates used to sit on a rock and teach people, or like those things. People who can do both those things, those are the economic rock stars. So whatever side of the spectrum that you're on, if you're someone who's been a quote unquote a liberal arts person, learn more about this technology. If you're a technology person, learn how to deal with people. If you can do both those things, even before the pandemic, there were never enough of those people. I would talk with CEOs and they would say, shoot, forget all the training. I'll train them. Just give me someone who has the right mindset and I'll train them. Or you would hear complaints about, hey, this person is technically gifted, but in terms of I can't make them a manager because of they don't have some of this other stuff. And so that's what I think. That's where I think the opportunity is. But again, promise and peril is going to take our vigilance, but also these tremendous opportunities. I spent a lot of time in the XR industry. XR is virtual reality, mixed reality, augmented reality. You're seeing powerful examples to use it for training people with disabilities. You're seeing it in the healthcare space. How do I train paramedics to do certain incisions on site of an accident without actually using a cadaver? Insurance companies using this to train claims adjusters. Hey, you're gonna put on the goggles. You're in a house that's had a fire, and I'm gonna walk you through how to do the investigation without you ever stepping in to a house that's had a fire. And that's how I'm gonna assess you too. So I think there are these opportunities. But let me just say one last thing, which is one of the perils that I see and that I want to make sure we mitigate against. So I spend a lot of time talking about it is how do you make sure the people in the room developing these technologies reflect the country, reflect the world? Um, because one, there's a there's an effectiveness standpoint. If you mean to sell this to everybody, it needs to have been created with the views and the needs of everyone. Secondly, there's an equity and economic point, which is these technologies will create trillions of dollars of wealth. And if those trillions of dollars of wealth are not accessible to everyone, we're going to frankly see a lot of the economic patterns of the past repeated. Someone once said to me, um, people having differing levels of wealth because some people have certain gifts or whatever because they quote unquote earned it. That actually is not what bothers people. What bothers people is when they feel like the thing standing between me and that wealth is not a meritocratic thing. It's a thing because of who I am, where I was born, a thing that I have no control over. That's standing between me and wealth, me and a better life for my family. And so, in many ways, that escalator of social mobility that my parents came to this country for, we got to make it real. When I think about the story of my family, it is an American triumph, but it's also an American rarity. It doesn't happen as often now as it should. If you look at the data, sadly, if I go to someone, if I go to a baby right now and I ask them, tell me the zip code you were born in, tell me the education of your parents, tell me the income of your parents. Sadly, you can all too accurately predict where they're going to end up right as they come out of the womb, and that's not right. We want to change that, and part of the way we're going to change that is making sure that these things that are going to create this wealth in the future are accessible to everyone. I'll say one last thing. I was at an event with Van Jones about 3 months ago, and he talked about. He said, "Look, 80% black people. Right, he said 96% of black people, and 96% of white people, 96% of poor people, 96% of rich people know the exact same thing about AI, which is nothing. Which means this is a jump ball moment. This in some ways that ignorance is very equalizing. And so the question is, how do we keep that playing field level? And the way to do it is to make sure that I'm from Prince George's County, Maryland. As we think about in the inner beltway of my county where we have a lot of challenges, how do we make sure that those kids know what a large language model is and have put on an XR headset and know how to begin to program a simulation there, who know what a what a qubit is, which is the core of quantum computing, or know what a UAV is, which is an unmanned aerial vehicle, which are now going to be used for everything from crop dusting to fighting forest fires to doing geolocation. How do we make sure that that is as much a part of their education as reading, writing, and arithmetic were in the last century? Because I'll tell you, if you were to go to any fancy school across the country, that is going to become part of what they are doing in the future because people know how valuable that is. And so I think, to me, when I think about the next kind of phase of work, not just for me but for the country, it's that. How do we make sure that these new engines of progress and growth are accessible to everyone? Because that's what's going to help us get the most out of them. These solutions to climate change, to disease. For example, go back to the pandemic discussion. When I was in the administration, the head of the Office of Science and Tech Policy in the White House, one of his ambitions was, all right, it took us 9 months to create that vaccine. Historic. That was historic. I cannot describe to you the scientific marvel that that was. He said, is there a world where we can make a vaccine in 100 days to a pandemic like that? He said, if it's going to do it, AI is going to be a part of that. Quantum computing is going to be a part of that. So on and so forth. So as we think about these bigger challenges that are coming, climate change, which we spent a lot of time figuring out, these technologies can be the fuel for those solutions, but only if those technologies are put in the hands of everybody. And now I'll say really my last thing on this, I swear, which is Raj Chetty, who's an amazing economist at Harvard that has done research on social mobility. He has the tax records of every American since 1950, so he can map what's happened to people over time in terms of their economics. And he has a long presentation that he gives, but he did. There's a last slide of it which I'll share, which is it's titled "The Lost Einsteins," and he basically looked at a bunch of kids who were in the third grade who performed at the highest level of a math exam. And then he projected forward, and he disaggregated it by race: white, black, Hispanic, Asian, Native American, so on and so forth. And then he projected forward. And what he found was the rate of patents filed by the white kids was literally 3x the time, white nations was 3x the time, the time of black kids and Latino kids. They scored the same on the exam in terms of their aptitude. But my only conclusion is the opportunities available to them were different afterward. So some of those kids got to make NVIDIAs, while some of those other kids, frankly, didn't go past the block. Not because they were not smart. Their results proved it. But they did not have it, or maybe they did have an idea, but they couldn't access the patent system or all that superstructure that's required to turn an idea into a company and into a product. So our charge is to make sure that the opportunities are available. And if they are available, the thing that I think about is how many more Einsteins could we have? How much faster could we have come up with that vaccine? How much faster can we figure out how we harness the power of the sun so we don't burn up the planet? How fast can we come up with these new technologies and new companies that are going to employ people across the country, particularly in the poorest parts? They're going to change around and elevate the economy. So that's what I spend a lot of my time thinking about. And if I think about whatever that work that I think God has put in front of me, it's going to be somewhere there.
Chike, we've talked about so much, and I could probably talk to you all day, but your wife will get upset if we don't get off of this call at some point, as well as the people that are depending on you for the work that you do. I have just two final questions that I'd love you to answer. You've had so many leadership experiences. You've been able to learn from, it sounds like, some really amazing people. I've got to go get that book because it aligns with the way that I believe we need to lead by empowering others. What is your number one piece of advice for a leader who is watching us, who is listening to us right now, and they're trying to figure out, because you also have a passion for this, how do I impact people at scale? What is the number one piece of advice that you would give to someone who maybe is starting with something small, but they want to see it grow and make an impact that they can be proud of?
Be clear about the problem that you're trying to solve. When I sit with leaders a lot, I push really hard on what is it you want to solve. So if I sit with, let's say, a nonprofit CEO or founder, all right, what do you want to do? I want to work on education. Be more precise. I want to work on education for kids who are 8 to 12. Okay, better. How? And what you want to do is push until you get to a really precise definition of the problem that's quick, that you can understand, that other people can understand. And so that's one. Define your problem. Secondly, make sure you're defining a problem that, how will I say this, that other people are not in. Meaning, a lot of times, particularly I see this in a nonprofit space, everyone started a nonprofit. And every now and again I say, are you sure you shouldn't go work for this other person? Yeah. Do you really need this kind of new thing? Are you stepping? Is there unmet demand, to use the business term? Are you stepping in a place that you are being called to, or is your ego calling you to? So that's two. So problem, making sure that that's actually a space that is unoccupied. But number one, you won't create a sustainable business or enterprise if it is occupied. But secondly, that's not where the world needs you. You probably need to think harder. I say next, if you're talking about scale, the key thing is what is that path to sustainability? And I've generally seen two paths to sustainability for particularly social impact ventures, but ventures overall. One way is I'm just going to keep growing, growing, growing. Meaning, all right, I have one store, I'm going to have five. I'm going to have go from 5 stores to 15, so on, and I'm going to run it all from central. In many ways, you have more control, but on the other hand, a couple things happen when you scale like that you have to mitigate. One is quality control gets harder the bigger that you get. Look, pick whatever. My gut is, and I don't go to Chick-fil-A as much as I used to because I'm trying to be better about my health. Yeah, but is the chicken sandwich from the first at the most recent Chick-fil-A as good as the one from the first Chick-fil-A? I don't know. Most people say they're still pretty good, but there probably is a difference. And if they are, it's because somebody made sure that Chick-fil-A sandwich, it takes a lot to make sure that as you grow, you're producing the same level of products. So that's one way. I just grow. I grow, I grow, I grow, but there are challenges with that. The second way to grow is, you know what? It doesn't matter if I do the thing, I want other people to do the thing. And I want to teach them how. And so one example that I give is for those who know the kind of education space, a great visionary from New York City named Jeffrey Canada created something called the Harlem Children's Zone, which is this amazing nonprofit that covers 97 square blocks of Harlem. And they have said every kid in Harlem, we are going to create a web of services so that no kid falls through the cracks. This starts from a baby college, meaning they're working with parents who have the kid hasn't come out yet, all the way through early childhood. They run to schools, web of other nonprofits. They are working on they're doing college access. They are creating financial products for these kids so when they graduate college, they can begin to create wealth for themselves, buy a home, do things like that. Jeffrey Kennedy was the founder and CEO. Current CEO is actually a former classmate of mine, Kwame Owusu-Kessie, who is an amazing leader. And so they're doing this work. President Obama, when he came in, he said, I want to help this work replicate across the country. They created something called the Promise Zone Initiative. 39 other areas across the country are replicating this work with federal funds. And there came a point where they had a choice. Hey, I could just make more Harlem Children's Zones around the country and run it all from Harlem. But you know what? Every community is different. Chattanooga is different from Harlem, is different from Nashville, is different from Miami. Let me just teach people. And so they've created this thing called the William Julius Wilson Institute, where it's effectively a social mobility university. People from around the country want to do this work. They come there, they learn, and they go back. And I'm gonna take what I learned in Harlem and I'm gonna apply it the Baltimore way. I'm gonna apply it the Chicago way. And that's how they're scaling. Neither approach is wrong. You just have to think through which one is right for you. And both have challenges because for their challenge, the issue is those models are going to look very different. The people in Baltimore may not do it the way that Jeff Canada would do it, but that's not the point. Some people will screw up, some people will fail, but it's a lot easier to sustain. It takes a lot less cash, so on and so forth. So thinking through your method of scaling. So again, what's the problem you're solving? Is there unmet demand? There's room for you. How are you going to scale once you figure it out? And then a last piece, which is hard, which is, I call it your own leadership walk. How do you make sure that you are continually honing yourself as a leader? And I think the biggest thing is how do you listen to others? A lot of leadership is listening. That is the thing that I have learned from being a young man on. I work in it every day. And then secondly, how do you in some ways quiet yourself? How do you quiet yourself in terms of making sure that your mind is clear, but also making sure that when you make a decision, your ego is as far from it as possible. That's hard. We all have them, particularly when you're a leader. And by the way, people want to fuel your ego. I'll tell you, we used to make this joke, when you get power, all of a sudden you're smart, you're good looking, you're tall, people, everything you say is right. People fuel that. And you have to remember that's not for me, that's for the title. Some people can forget that and they think it's for them. And so that is it's a very hard psychological maintenance you have to do to make sure that you are listening to others and that you're quieting yourself. It doesn't mean that you have nothing to contribute, but it means you don't make your ego the focal point of how you make decisions. And that's all really difficult. It's really hard. You'll screw it up. You'll screw it up initially. When I think about scale, and not just scale, but but part of the definition of scale is sustainability, meaning your goal is not to serve everyone for a year and then fall down. Your goal is to be able to do this for everyone forever, whatever the it is. And so part of that is you have to create a process, a method of scaling an organization and a leadership and governance structure that maintains that. It is very difficult. If you look at the Fortune 500, I forget the figure. Half those companies weren't there 50 years ago. A lot of them don't exist. If you go to the companies that were big shots when my parents came to America, most of them don't exist today. Some of that is the market changed. Some of that's the leadership couldn't get it together. Some of that is they didn't find the right way to scale. There are very few 100-year-old companies. Very few 200-year-old companies. It is very hard to do a thing at scale for a long period of time. Let me say one last thing, which is, and it's something my pastor said. He talked about don't pray small prayers. He said, if you have small kids, your kids come to you and they ask you for all types of crazy things, even after they've been bad. They'll come and you're like, how dare you ask me? And my pastor said they do that because they know who their father is. So when you pray to your father, why are you praying prayers that are small? You know who he is. Create the heavens and the earth, the sun and the moon. Don't pray small prayers. And so if you take that to this space, what I always ask entrepreneurs who are trying to start something, particularly if they're trying to create impact, or if you're trying to create a company that solves a problem for a consumer, what would it take to solve that problem? Not mitigate it, not manage it, solve it. If you say the problem is that we don't have enough early education resources for these young kids in this community, what would it take to solve that, to end it so that, and when I say end it, I mean end it so that your organization doesn't have to exist anymore to do this thing. That's a very different frame from I'm just going to work on this, work on that. I'm looking to end this problem. And I find at times many entrepreneurs think too small about that. And I encourage think big, think scary big, things that scare you. And I'm not saying that you'll do it all. You're not get it all done in your lifetime yourself, but that should be the frame. If you think that big, it will get solved. And so those are the couple things that I think I would say to someone who's looking to create that impact at scale. What's the problem? Make sure there's room for you. Figure out how you want to scale. Manage yourself in your leadership, and then don't pray small prayers.
So much wisdom there, Chike. Final question. I think you're blessed in how you grew up and the things that you were able to see. Being the first person in your family born in America, you had an appreciation for the opportunity that you were given. And what I've heard from you in this conversation as we've been talking is it's almost like part of your life mission is I don't want to blow that opportunity. So my last question is, when all is said and done, none of us know how long we have, but what is it that you hope people will remember Chike for when all is said and done?
I will answer this question in three ways. I think the first, there are 7 billion, 8 billion people on the planet. And I do believe that we're responsible to all of them. There are three that I am more responsible to than anyone else, and that's my wife Crystal, my son Kalechi, my daughter Shizara. And I hope that people will say I was a good husband and I was a good father. I hope they would say that, and that means that's number one. Um, I think number two, um, there are three words that I hope that people would put to me. One is courage that I thought was right even when it was tough. Compassion that I, um, particularly for those who have not been as blessed as I've been blessed. And then I think consequence. He did things that lived after him. And then the last way that I'd answer it is there is a scholar. When I was at Harvard, there was the pastor of the Memorial Church, which is the Harvard Church, was a man named Peter Gomes, Episcopalian pastor. He passed away, oh God, 2014, 2015. Legendary theologian. And he wrote a book called The Scandalous Life of Jesus. And he wrote about Jesus as if we go back to the time, Jesus was, Christianity was a scandal. It was to be rooted out. He was a social revolutionary. And he was giving an interview about the book, and the interviewer asked him, "What do you think God requires of you?" Very profound question. And he thought about it, and I think he talked about, love mercy, do justice, walk humbly with that God. But the interviewer pushed him more, and he said, "What do you think God requires of you?" And he said, and he must have been 80 at this time. He said, "To do all I can with all I have, because none of it's really mine anyway. It's all on loan. It's all in trust." And I hope when that time comes to me, hopefully a long time from now, that's why I'm not going to Chick-fil-A anymore. I hope they would say he left it all in the field. He did all he could with all he had because he realized none of it was his anyway. I'm a trustee. All of what I've been given, I'm just a trustee. I'm holding it for my maker. And it's kind of like that parable of the master who went away and gave each of his servants some cash, and he said, and the one he was mad at was the one who just took it and buried it in the ground. And my hope is he did everything he could with everything he got. And maybe he failed, maybe he screwed up, but it wasn't for lack of trying. And if those three kind of memories, those three things can be true, that I was a good husband, I was a good father, that I lived my life with courage, compassion, and consequence, and that I did all I could with all I had because I realized it wasn't mine, hopefully that's a job well done.
Hmm. Chike, I will say well done on this interview, on this time that you have spent with us today. You have answered the call to share your wisdom that you have gathered over the years. I'm believing that there are many, many more years ahead of you and much more impact that you will be able to create. Um, I feel like we barely scratched the surface. There's so many things that we could talk about, but it has been a blessing. And I want to thank you on behalf of our entire audience for spending the time, for pouring out your heart, and for how you have served our country and how you serve others. Thank you, Chike. We certainly wish you God's best as you move forward into all that He's called you to do.
Same to you. God bless you, to your audience, and just thank you for what you do in this space that you've created.